Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland State University's Cleveland Marshall College of Law and a longtime proud City Club member. I was honored to be asked by our speaker today to introduce him after Mayor Jackson, President Kelly, and Dick Pogue declined. Matt said just one thing to me: Lee, just remember, I'm the speaker, not you. Very funny, Joe Simperman. Okay. I've known Matt Zone since he was 12 years old, when I fell in love with his beautiful, brilliant sister, Peggy Zone Fisher, over there. If I'd known I'd get that response, I would actually sit down now. But I want to tell you a quick story that tells you everything you need to know about Matt Zone and the Zone family. In 1944, Mary Zone and Mike Zone were married. 90 days later, Mike Zone was captured as a prisoner of war at the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. We often wondered how Mike Zone survived that prisoner of war camp, when younger men, healthier men, and stronger men did not. But Mike didn't like to talk about his experience as a prisoner of war, so none of the Zone children really knew the story, until one day Mary Zone pulled out of her bedroom closet the diary that Mike Zone had kept as a prisoner of war. Two things jump out from the pages of that diary. First, he listed the names of the 9 children he would someday have. And second, Mike Zone loved to eat pasta but had no idea how to cook it. All throughout the pages, intricate pasta recipes so exquisite that when he was liberated and came back to Detroit Shoreway, Mary Zone, who was a great cook, used those recipes, but guess what? Mike Zone didn't understand them. He still couldn't cook. Mike Zone survived because he was able to see beyond the cruelty of the guards, beyond the barbed wire. He could see something that the other men could not. It was his future. And that future is what drove him every day. The greatest gift any of us can give another human being, or for that matter, a city, is the ability to see your own future when there's difficult circumstances staring you in the face. But little did Mike Zone know that someday one of his sons would follow in his and Mary's footsteps as a Cleveland City Councilman, and like his parents, give the greatest gift anyone can give to someone else: the vision to see a brighter, better future, no matter how difficult the circumstances. That's what Mike and Mary did for their children and for their community, and that's what Matt Zone is doing today, not only for his family, not only for his community, but now for the nation. As the president of the National League of Cities, ladies and gentlemen, members of the City Club, join me in welcoming Councilman Matt Zone, president of the National League of Cities.
Well, it's great to be with all of you today. Thank you, Lee, for that warm introduction. It's always nice to be introduced by somebody who you look up to, and I just happen to call him my brother-in-law as well. So thank you all so much for such a warm welcome to my family and friends, my colleagues in public service, City Club members, guests, to the greatest leadership Cleveland class that ever was, the 2000, to the City Club Board of Directors and staff, thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's one of the honors of my lifetime to appear on this historic stage. I'm Matt Zone, a proud Cleveland native and a council member for our city. I've had the high honor of representing Cleveland's 15th Ward, and over the past 6 months, I've also had the high honor of serving as the president of the National League of Cities. The only other Clevelander to serve as president of NLC in our 93-year history was our beloved George Voinovich in 1985 when he was mayor of Cleveland. And when the federal and local governments work together as partners, we have a real chance to solve the challenges in our communities. This afternoon, I want to tell you about how cities became such a driving political force in America, because I believe that city leaders are the key to our country's future. But when we talk about the future, it's also important to understand where we come from. So I want to tell you a little bit about my past. Lee did a pretty good job of that. I grew up in the Detroit Shorey neighborhood on the Lower West Side. And by the time I showed up, my family had been in Cleveland for over 40 years. From our founding, the Detroit Shorey neighborhood was a community that welcomed outsiders looking for economic opportunity. German and Irish immigrants were the first to arrive. Major investments in factories and railroads and ports and canals had helped to create the economic boom in Cleveland. And good jobs were there for the taking. And by the turn of the century, Italian families were the main immigrants group moving into our area. And descendants from some of those families, including my own, still live in that neighborhood today. Unlike many Italian Catholic families, they had a lot of kids. I had 8 brothers and sisters, and with a family that large, you really understood equity. In fact, my mother used to tell me, I love all my kids. I just need to love some more than others. Isn't that correct, Beth? By the time I was born, my father, Mike, was already serving on Cleveland City Council. And he worked hand in hand over the 14 years with my mother, Mary Zone, serving the members of our community, a community that was grown more and more diverse throughout the 60s and 70s. But in 1974, my dad suffered a fatal heart attack when he was just 54 years old, the same age I am today. And my mother kept our family together, and her strength and resolve during that period continues to inspire me today. But not long after my dad's death, George Forbes, then the council president, and Arnold Pinckney came to visit our home. And they urged my mother to finish my dad's term. And she answered the call to service and went on to win the next 3 elections and gained a remarkable amount of influence in City Hall. Mary Zone was the first Italian-American woman to serve on the council and became the first woman council majority whip in the history of our city. In fact, her first legislative initiative was she led the effort for the creation of the Cleveland EMS service in 1975. And that was due to when my father had passed, he had fallen down, he had a major heart attack, and back then, in pre-74, we didn't have an ambulance service, and it took 52 minutes for a private service to come to the house. So for that, I think of my mom often. But after her service on council, she continued helping those in our community that needed it the most, including people suffering in the early days of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. My parents knew that the decisions made at the city level had real impacts on people's everyday lives. And their story and their commitment to building a better future for our community is what motivated me to run for their former seat on council. It's what drives me to keep pushing for a better life for the constituents in my neighborhood and in our city. And it's the example I'm trying to live up to every day as the president of the National League of Cities. So now, for those of you who don't know who NLC is, we are the largest organization for cities and city leaders in the United States. We're based in Washington, D.C., just down the street from the U.S. Capitol. And we represent more than 19,000 cities and towns and villages across America. Approximately 120,000 locally elected officials in the United States. We're politically a nonpartisan organization, but I like to say we are partisan when it comes to cities. You know, our job is to represent the interest of cities in Washington, before Congress, to the administration, and everywhere. We want everyone to hear what city leaders have to say, because often they're the only ones who can see things as they really are. And that's true in our country. Now, when I was first elected to leadership position at the NLC, the country was in a very different place. Republicans had just won the Senate and shored up the hold on the House. Barack Obama had 2 years left as president, and John Boehner was still Speaker of the House. And Donald Trump was hosting the 14th season of The Apprentice. I had no idea, none of us did, how everything would shift by the time I became NLC's president. And none of us knew just how many challenges we would face with the federal budget, with the ACA, climate change, infrastructure spending. I could go on and on and on. But when I took office last year on November 19th, the election results were just 2 weeks old. And suddenly, we were looking at millions of Americans who could lose access to their health care. We were looking at an uncertain future for climate action and all kinds of federal investments. And we were finally waking up to the country's deepest divides, like our sky-high rates of inequality and our growing opportunity gap between urban and rural communities. But the truth is that all of these challenges had already been there long before last November. Because the bottom line, we've got an economy and a system that works for some people, but it doesn't work for a lot of others. And the economic well-being of our most vulnerable communities and families is at risk, as much as it's ever been in our nation's history. Nationally, the top 1% has more wealth than the bottom 95% combined. And the top 10% earn 9 times more income than the bottom 90%. Just pause and ponder those statistics. As NLC president, I have focused my efforts on how we can build economic mobility and opportunities in cities. I believe it's the defining challenge of our time. And if we don't figure out how to create an inclusive, equitable economy for vulnerable people, for underprivileged communities, for working moms, for young graduates and senior citizens, that means we failed as leaders. And what also concerns me as an elected official and as a native Clevelander is how we can lift up minority communities and people of color. For African Americans and Hispanic Americans and for immigrants, the challenges are just so much more than economics. The average wealth of white families has grown over the years, but for Hispanics and African American, their wealth has hardly grown at all. And that's the state of our economy, and it's the state of the American dream today. If you're not born in the right place, with the right parents, and the right color skin, your chances at the American dream is so much harder. And this issue is so important. And that's why for me, for my term as the president of NLC, that's why I've created the Economic Mobility and Opportunity Task Force. Each year, the NLC president has the opportunity to take the knowledge of our organization and champion an issue. Last year, our past president chose to focus on the opioid and heroin crisis. Some past presidents have chosen to form task force, others haven't. And at the end of the year, they author a white paper. And during that year, we get to travel the country and speak about these issues. So this year, I tapped Atlanta's Mayor Kasim Reed, an amazing American leader, to chair our committee. And I want to recognize my council colleague, Phyllis Cleveland, who serves on that national task force. Phyllis, thank you for what you do in serving on this task force. Because even though cities have rebounded and are as prosperous as they've ever been, there are still populations that have been seriously left behind. And if cities work together, I believe they can be the key to expanding economic opportunity for all of our residents in our communities. And we as officials and community leaders and citizens, each and every one of you in this room, you can be the instruments of change in strengthening economic mobility while we as municipal leaders work towards balancing our municipal budgets. Regardless of the political climate, and let's be honest, it's not good right now. We have to rely on each other to help lead our communities and to provide support for the disadvantaged and serve as a champion for expanding economic opportunity. Our economy isn't lifting people up like it used to. And so where are the pathways to the American dream? You know, a child born to parents in the bottom fifth of the income distribution has a small chance of ever reaching the top fifth. And the chances of that same mobility happening in Canada is almost twice as much as it is in America. And as Americans, we should be ashamed of that, and we can do better. In my view, economic mobility and opportunity is our generation's greatest challenge. But honestly, to many people, this isn't news. And there are populations of Americans that have been living with this reality for decades, some centuries. And I think they've been waiting for the rest of us to wake up. And to tell you the truth, some of us are still waiting on Washington to figure it out too. After all, we still got a deadlocked Congress and a divided public and a frustrated White House. It seems like the White House has got a revolving door in every office. But last November, when all of these lessons landed at once, and I started my tenure as the NLC president, I started to look around for solutions. And I started looking for somewhere in government where people were taking a stand for what's right and working to lift up those who are less fortunate. And I found that there was one level of leadership that was already tackling those challenges head on with innovations and bipartisan solutions. That was cities. Because wherever you go, city leaders all share the same goals and values. Every community cares about building infrastructure, keeping residents safe, creating local economies that work for everyone. And city leaders are the ones who are most accountable and trusted and the most accessible and the least tied up in partisan politics. You know, like Vice President Joe Biden told me at our national conference in 2015, local government is the blankety blank, so you can just imagine what he said, hardest elected position to serve. It goes because the people know where you live. He said when he served in local government, he couldn't go anywhere without somebody sharing, and I'm sure my colleagues who serve can appreciate that line. But at NLC, we understand and we know that local leadership and local solutions are critical to solving the challenges facing our nation. All of these major issues, and changes we're facing, they're playing out at the local level. Cities and towns must be part of the solution. And given what's going on in Washington, they may be the only solution. And that's what the Economic Mobility and Opportunity Task Force is all about. And what we've seen over the past few years, and not just since last November, is when the federal government is absent, cities will lead. As the NLC president, I have been lucky enough to travel around the country. I've met hundreds and hundreds of city leaders to talk about their work. And everywhere I've been, I've seen cities leading the charge to innovate and to make people's lives better. And it's not just optics, it's not just a tweet or a press release. I really believe that we're coming to a new era of politics, where cities are becoming the primary political force in America. And there are a number of reasons behind that. Our cities are growing again, as fast as they ever have, and driving the local economy in a new way. And with the help of technology, they're becoming more responsive and democratic than ever before. And all of this is happening at the same time that Washington is moving slower than ever and becoming less responsive and less accountable. That's just part of why this is happening. But what I know is that on every issue, whether it's from technology to healthcare, from infrastructure spending to public safety and immigration, my friends on city councils and in city halls and mayors across America are playing a more important role than they ever have been before. They're stepping up as national voices. They're getting their hands dirty with new policy ideals. They're raising their own tax money to make their own public investments. And for me, what defines our current political moment? Not what happened last November, but what's been going on in cities all along. It's been going on in places like Pittsburgh, where my friend, Bill Peduto, has become one of America's leading voices on climate change. You see, Pittsburgh knows the value of environmental protection. It's just like Cleveland. They're an older manufacturing city that struggles with pollution and emissions. So they learned the hard way how important it is to protect the environment. But when the current administration decided to back out of the Paris Climate Accord with some line about looking out for Pittsburgh and not Paris, Mayor Peduto decided to step up and lead. He called Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, to talk about climate solutions. He went on the road talking about the real stories of Pittsburgh, how the city cleaned itself up with tech jobs and new residents, how residents are committed to fighting global warming. And Mayor Peduto didn't wait for his party leadership or a leaked story to just test the waters. He stood up for his city and he led. And Cleveland has also been a national leader in sustainability long before it was fashionable. It started way back in 1969 with Mayor Carl Stokes and his leadership on clean water. And it continues to this present day with Mayor Frank Jackson and the Sustainable Cleveland Initiative and the leadership throughout our community. You know, I applaud Mayor Jackson for joining more than 300 climate mayors in supporting the Paris Agreement and the global fight against climate. In recent years, we in Cleveland have made a significant progress in reducing carbon pollution, improving our air and water quality, expanding bike infrastructure, and much more, while at the same time growing economically. And like cities throughout the US, our next step is to ensure environmental benefits and sustainable economic growth is felt equitably throughout the city. I know this is an issue that's extremely important to our mayor and to Council President Kelly. And that's what we're seeing all over and with every issue. It's stuff that my colleagues and I fight for every single day on the council. And like in Boston, Massachusetts, where Mayor Marty Walsh is fighting for his city on immigration. You know, when Washington told the city of Boston its cops had to start helping them detain immigrants, and they threatened to hold federal funding ransom over it, Mayor Walsh told them, just try us. And Boston is just one of 100 cities doing this. And it's an issue I care a lot about. You know, some people call them sanctuary cities. I like to think of them as welcoming cities, which is how Cleveland describes itself and how we treat immigrants and refugees, and like how Cleveland welcomed my family in the Detroit Shorey neighborhood, or how we're still welcoming people every single day, regardless of what country they come from, or what they look like, or who they worship, or who they love. But nobody's better than Mayor Marty at handling these kinds of things. So when the White House turned up the heat and said, Mayor Walsh said, you're safe in Boston, even if it means using City Hall itself. If we want people to live here, they're gonna live here. They can use my office. And Mayor Walsh is a true American leader and a hero of mine. And locally, I'd like to recognize the leadership of my former council colleague, Joe Simperman. Long before Joe was president and CEO of Global Cleveland, he too had a dream of building an inclusive community of newcomers. And today that dream is a reality with the creation of the Dream Neighborhood in the Clark Fulton neighborhood. Working closely with the Metro West Development Organization and Councilman Cummins, they're making that a reality right here in Cleveland. And it's this. And it's the same story we're seeing over and over again all over America. Just like in Charlotte, where the City Hall is locked in a fight against its own state legislature. I know you've heard about this story. Back in the beginning of 2016, the Charlotte City Council passed an anti-discrimination law. Wow, feels like that's a long time ago, but that was just last year. So much has happened since then. But after the Charlotte City Council passed this law, Ordinance 7056, the state government came back with a new bill and said, no, you can't do that. They said, we're taking away your power here. You can't protect your own citizens against discrimination. And this kind of state preemption is happening everywhere in our country. But I'm so proud of my friends in the Charlotte City Council. They took a risk to protect their most vulnerable citizens. They took a stand and they stood their ground while their state government tried to take everything away that they could stop this action. And this year, I'm proud to say that we're taking NOC's annual city summit straight to Charlotte, North Carolina to say, I stand with the city of Charlotte. It's because that's what we're all about, cities leading. It's the same story everywhere we go. City leaders are out in front because their voters don't wait 4 years for them to tell them what they think they're going to do. And it's happening all over America. It's happening in Oklahoma City, where the mayor took on obesity challenge, and he challenged his city to lose 1 million pounds. It's happening in Austin, where the city council stood up to tech giants to protect background checks for drivers. It's happening in Huntington, West Virginia, where the mayor is carrying Narcan and visiting addicts to talk about treatment. It's happening in Seattle, in Los Angeles, in Charlotte, and in Cleveland. Cities are leading because we've got to get things done and need to get done. Our constituents depend on it, and we can't wait for Washington to get around to do it. And if we want real solutions on climate change, we're going to have to count on city leaders. If we want real innovation in tech and in transit and in public safety, we're going to have to come from cities. And if we want somebody to head up to Washington and talk about what we really need in our communities beyond the sound bites, beyond the partisan games, city leaders are going to have to take the challenge. So here's my challenge to each and every one of you. Get involved in your cities, wherever that may be. Get to know your local officials, especially your mayors and council members. You've got to get them involved and tell them what you think your community needs and why you need them to help fight for you on the federal level. Think globally, act locally. And it doesn't stop with your local officials. Call your representatives in Congress. I want you to tell them who you are, tell them what your city is doing and what it needs. And tell this stuff to the people around you every day. Follow up what's going on in your cities. Be engaged in your neighborhoods and make those connections. Your stories are so important. Our communities here in Cleveland are so important. So that's my challenge to each and every one of you. Be the champion for your city. Don't accept this new called normal. And join me in making cities the center of America. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, President Zone. I'm Dan Malthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club, and today we are enjoying a Friday forum at the Global Center for Health Innovation featuring Matt Zone. He's president of the National League of Cities, and he's also a Cleveland councilman for Ward 15 and a native son of Cleveland. We're about to head into the Q&A, and we welcome questions from all of you, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you joining us via our radio broadcast or our webcast. There are a few ways to participate in the Q&A. You can form a line behind either of the two microphones at the front of the room to ask your question. You can also tweet a question at the City Club, and our staff will work it into the program. Lastly, if you're watching via Facebook Live, you can leave a question in the comments section there. Can we have our first question?
I preface my remarks, Councilman, to say how proud you have done us here in Cleveland, how proud we as Clevelanders are for your national leadership in the National League of Cities. Thank you very much for what you're doing. My question is, as you know, Cuyahoga County is comprised of 57 political subdivisions, villages and cities, plus 2 townships.
Right.
It is no doubt about that there's a lot of duplication, redundancies, and waste. What does the National League of Cities stand as far as working on this issue to help? Because Cleveland and Cuyahoga cannot be alone in this issue. And what are they doing? What's your policy as far as helping, encouraging, leading communities to reduce redundancies, waste, duplication, and to encourage collaboration, coordination, and even in some cases merger? Please.
Thank you, Mayor Akers, for the question. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Cuyahoga County, then the Northeast Ohio region. But our organization is spending a considerable amount of time looking at how cities functions within regions. Cleveland, we're not competing against Columbus. We're not competing against Cincinnati. It's the Northeastern Ohio region working collaboratively across municipal boundaries. Air pollution and crime doesn't stop at a municipal border. Working cooperatively as a region our region's competing against Dubai and Shanghai. And so we've authored a lot of reports on this. We've authored reports around the cities of the future. And we encourage, when possible, to partner with neighboring communities. Let's put this in perspective and bring it locally. In Cuyahoga County, 57 cities, 2 townships, 59 communities. The population in my ward, of the 17 wards, I have the most populous, about 28,000 people. The population in my ward alone is greater than 52 of those 59 communities in our county. And when you look and extrapolate that out over Northeastern Ohio, in the Northeastern Ohio region, there are 845 taxing authorities, local governments, school boards, regional taxing authorities, 845. The GDP of the Northeastern Ohio region is $170 billion a year. You know what the cost is to run government, to run those 845 municipal taxing authorities annually? $17 billion. We can do better as a region. We must do better as a region. Looking at what Louisville did in that metro region, what Nashville has done, it's time that this region make the hard decision. I'll sacrifice my position. I'll give it up as a council member. But it's time that this county stop the balkanization of what's going on within our region and think about how we can collaborate and share better.
Matt, first of all, we thank you for your service, as did the mayor. You emphasize the power of the cities, and frankly, they are the majority throughout the country. Yet that majority is outweighed thanks to the gerrymander.
Right.
That's why we have the problem at both the state level and in the and in the House of Representatives. Does the National League of Cities have a program to fight the gerrymander and get back to the one man, one vote? Sorry, women, but that's the way it is. One man, one vote rule that the Supreme Court passed so long ago.
Thank you for the question. And Mary Zone and my very 5 strong-willed sisters would say one woman vote, but we don't necessarily take a position on this issue. But what we do, and thank you for the question because it's an important one, we do educate our members on how divisive gerrymandering has been for our country. I have 2 great congresspeople. You know, I have a personal relationship with Congressman Fudge and Congresswoman Capter, but my congresswoman lives 2.5 hours from me in a car, and she knows that's not a good district. We have educated our members on how we can have more equitable drawing of congressional districts. We really need the states to step up and show some leadership. That's why I'm really excited about 2018's election. Hopefully we elect some really good leaders and that apportionment board and through fair congressional drawing of districts, and as well as in our state. You know, we are a swing state. We have 12 Republican congressmen and 4 Democratic congresspeople. You would think that we should have 8 and 8, right? It's a swing state. It's the power of the pen. We can do better as Americans, and thank you for the question.
I wanted to thank you, first of all, for your service.
Thank you.
You talked about equity, and I appreciate the focus on that. Mm-hmm. But within your conversation, I did not hear a mention of public education. Mm-hmm. And my frustration is that we all know, the research has been done, that poverty makes it very difficult for many of our students to succeed as they deserve to. Mm-hmm. I don't hear people, including our elected officials, really outraged about the environment of privatization that we are now living in. And I'm very, very concerned. 90% of our children in the United States attend public schools. So my question to you is public education anywhere on the agenda for the National League of Cities? Yeah,
thank you for the question, Meryl. Our organization has about 120 employees. We have about 50 of them that are work just in the space around our Youth Education and Families Institute. We've authored many reports on this. When you look at this equity issue, it's challenging. You know, there's so much nuance to what we do in government. And you heard me talk a little bit about the growing income inequality gap. And when you look through the prism of a racial lens and all of the complexities and challenges that our black and brown brothers and sisters have to deal with, it makes it only challenging more. We have advocated for a strong public system. Right now in our state, we have choice. And I am not an advocate for expanding that choice. I want to make our public schools the best they can be. It took a lot of courage by Mayor Jackson in an election year to get behind and really reform that. That didn't happen overnight, people. This was hundreds and hundreds of behind-the-scenes hours working with unions and the leadership of the administration to make that. But that Cleveland plan could be held out as a model that could be replicated and used in other arenas. I had the opportunity to have, albeit a 15-minute brief conversation with Secretary DeVos on this primary issue. She's one for expanding choice and expanding opportunities. And we talked about kids coming to our school system who are hungry, who don't have proper clothing, who don't have proper support at home to do it. And I think right now it's going to be a challenge with this new Secretary of Education, helping to understand the value of it. In my call to each and every one of you, that's where you have to help to become part of the change and make that happen. And I know you do that each and every day. Thank you for your service on the state school board.
Great.
Hi, good afternoon, Councilman, and thanks again as well for your leadership. So I wanted to delve into one of the items that you touched on in your speech, and that is the relationship between cities and transportation. And I wanted to know, as you have traveled the country, really talking to cities and their leaders, and you have learned more about the relationship between transportation and cities, what are some best practices or ideas that you have learned along your journey that you may be able to bring back here that we can really increase the role of the cities in transportation?
Well, thank you for that question. And that's a complex question, and so I'm going to try to give you the appropriate response. Let's talk about what the federal government's thinking about with respect to transportation. We haven't seen any specifics. President Trump's talked about $1 trillion transportation deal, so let's talk about that. What the president is proposing, but we haven't gotten into specifics yet, is $200 billion coming from our budget, from the federal budget. Another $300 billion is going to come from cities and states. So they're going to put up the other $300 billion. So that's $500 billion. The other $500 billion, they're proposing these 3P partnerships. Well, 3P partnerships don't work in every community. In fact, cities own and operate about 78% of all the roads and bridges in America. And over the last 20 years, we have had the ability, I know my finance director is here in the room, to have tax-exempt municipal bonds to fund and pay these projects. 93% of every muni bond that was floated in the last 2 decades, 93% would not be eligible for a 3P partnership. So it's not really a solid plan yet. The gas tax hasn't been raised since 1993. They never factored in or indexed it to the cost of inflation. They never thought back then when they enacted it in '93 that cars would get more efficient, that now we have electric vehicles, and there are people driving on our roads that we're not getting our fair share of return. We have been a strong proponent for when you create true economic mobility for the poorest in our community, you create wealth for everyone, not only poor people, but the middle income and the upper income. If you can create opportunities that people can get from job centers, from their home and back, or to goods and services, that makes it better for all. We have aggressively advocated that we create partnerships when appropriate, but I'll tell you, in Minneapolis, they're doing some really terrific things. I've been on Portland's light rail system where they've expanded it. They made a $300 million investment. Now it's approaching $4 billion of private sector investment. Those opportunities are great. I think our Euclid Health Line is being held out as a BRT national model on how you can do that and has won a lot of awards. I appreciate your advocacy on this issue as well. Thank you. I think you're up, Joe.
Good afternoon to my council person. I am attorney Joseph Meisner, and I have been involved with immigration issues for the past 40 years, particularly including people from Vietnam Right now I serve with the Friendship Foundation of American Vietnamese, founded by Ms. Yawa Ryan. We in Cleveland are very proud that we are a welcoming city based on our mayor's statements. And also, we have a great organization with Global Cleveland, headed by Joe Simperman. My question is this: in your efforts for the cities in America, what kind of programs have you seen that other cities may be using that we should consider here in Cleveland so that we once again become a real home for immigrants, whether from Italy, Vietnam, or any other country in the world? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your advocacies and decades of service. There are so many cities that are doing amazing stuff on this. I think of Betsy Hodges. She's the mayor of Minneapolis. She has a large Somali community, and she has opened up her doors. Right now, it's been a challenge for her. She is just finishing her first term, and she's doing some really creative things in that community about creating an ID system for people. They have a no arrest policy. Other communities are doing it. When the Sanctuary Cities issue surfaced, our organization, I put out a pretty strong worded statement that we're going to stand with cities in their ability to self-govern. The federal government can't rely on us to be the police agency for the federal government. And we can't just do that. The thing that I think some people in Congress, and in some respects our president, have a hard time grappling with is that when there's this trust between the immigrant community and the police department, they're willing to open up and share information about if a crime occurs. I know a situation that had just happened in our city where a woman now is unwilling to talk about a pretty heinous crime that happened in her family for fear of her being deported. There's a number of examples, Joe, that I could go on, but I'm going to cut it off there.
We're going to take a question from Twitter.
Okay.
What role does technology play in the future of cities?
You know, technology plays a vital role. I mean, right behind probably the mayor of the city, who's our CEO, probably the second most important, no offense, Council President Kelly, probably the second most important person in government is your chief information officer. And open data right now is critically important. Cities that aren't moving to this or migrating to this are going to be left way behind. Companies, when they're thinking of relocate, they want to know how committed are public governments committed to open data, sharing information in real time. In the city of Boston, you can look on their website and know when snow plows are about to hit your street. And you know, we do parking bans, and we do parking bans for 24 hours at a time, or when snow comes that people can't park there. It would be good, and I know we're migrating this way, we're not there yet, but we're moving towards this where we can send in real-time information, whether it's about waste collection pickup or garbage pickup, or what we're doing around if a major storm hits, removing trees and debris. But that's really important, and we have a whole Center for City Solutions. I would encourage everyone to visit our website, nlc.org, hit the search engine, put any topic you want. We've authored, there's hundreds of periodicals and papers on there on different information like this.
Thank you very much for coming, and I really appreciated your remarks. And you're exhorting everybody to, become more active in local affairs and local government. My question is, a lot of times when I talk to people about, politics or government, they don't seem to know much about local government. They don't, right. And it seems to me that local government, particularly, our school boards and our municipalities, they have more control on a day-to-day basis of a person's life than Washington does. And so my question is, you've been a councilman for many years. Has that been your experience, and that people don't seem to take as much of an interest in, these local elections as they do every 4 years for president, and what can be done about it?
Great question. I'll tell you, I'm fortunate and blessed to represent 3 dynamite neighborhoods. I represent the Detroit-Troy neighborhood, the Cudell neighborhood, and the Edgewater neighborhood. And for a long time, for 12 plus years, I represented a good portion of the Ohio City neighborhood. And I can attest, those 4 neighborhoods, they keep you on your toes. They are engaged. They are engaged on local issues. And my leadership style has always been to work with my community partners and the most important people, which are the residents, to really empower them to be part of the decision-making process. They've always been there from day one. Whether we're building 1 home or 300 homes, or we're dealing with a safety issue, they have been there to help and engage. And when I travel the country, I encourage local leaders that you really need to empower that next generation of community leaders. It doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you stronger as a leader. When you can mentor that next generation, get them involved, particularly in the decision-making process, make them feel like their voice mattered, that they are the architect of ultimately what happens in their community, it makes you a more effective leader.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, Rick.
I admire your facility in taking questions from every point of the compass. You're good at it. It's satisfying to hear. But at the beginning of your remarks, you said that the president of the NLC is asked to pick one topic for strategic focus. And if I heard correctly, it was economic disparity, or mobilizing
mobility and opportunity.
Mobility and opportunity, responding to the tremendous economic disparity that's rising in our country. So I take you back to your strategic focus and ask you, after half a year or whatever it has been of focus on that issue, is there some one thing, because if you say everything, I'm not going to hear anything. Is there some one thing that has come forward, has leapt out of your research, your thinking, your inquiry, that is the one thing you would draw to our attention today that helps move that strategic objective forward?
Thank you. There is a tremendous amount of economic development that's happening across our nation. Municipal leaders have the power through zoning and land use and grants and loan programs to make sure that we build equitable and just communities. And what we have been seeing across America, that there are some communities that are using the power of not only like a community benefits agreement like we're doing here in Cleveland, but having community impact fees tied towards development to ensure that a part of that development includes affordable housing, but yet yields a return back to those neighborhoods. I've been really blown away with some of this work that the city of San Diego is doing. San Diego is on fire right now, and they're using this community impact fee to refunnel dollars back into those geographical neighborhoods where economic development is occurring to make sure that it's being done equitable. And you know, let's face it, right now, the only thing we can do as municipal leaders is try to lift up the community we represent. The income inequality gap in our country is the greatest it's ever been since 1928, the year before the Great Depression. And so how are we as leaders being intentional, making sure that the policies and practices that we implement really truly benefit the community? And so from that, I think, Rick, that is something that I've been most impressed with. Thank you for your question.
Hi, thank you so much for your comments. So my question also has to do a little bit with economic development. I'm not originally from Cleveland, I'm from Syracuse, and I've lived in Cleveland for several years doing my PhD research here. And there's a lot of similarities that happen across the Rust Belt with you know, shrinking of the population and a shift in the economy from what used to be a manufacturing to a mostly service sector economy. You mentioned a little bit about Cleveland being competitive with Dubai and places internationally to attract businesses and institutions here. And so what have become the anchor institutions in Cleveland, such as the Cleveland Clinic and some of the big universities, don't necessarily couple up with the economic base of the population of Cleveland. So does the NLC have policies, or do you have a perspective on how to sort of address this decoupling of the population from what the economy really is founded upon in the city?
Great question. Can I call you doctor or not yet?
Not quite.
All right. Let's talk about our region first. So at the height of our population, Cleveland had 900 and almost 60,000 people. The metro region was about 1.4 million. Today, our metro region's about 1.25, somewhere around there, and the city of Cleveland's 400,000. So where did everyone go? They just moved out. But yet, we are still required to maintain all the roads and the bridges and the sewer systems and the structures. We built our city out for 1 million people, but now we have 40% living here. In making sure that there's true equitable economic development. I think that was the question, is like, how do we do that? Again, we have to be intentional that make sure that when we're driving economic development, it's not creating a redundancy in service, that we're working collaboratively across municipal borders, like we've done here locally, even in Cleveland, with partnerships we've done with contiguous suburbs. I think that's really the key to cities. Our competition, it's not Cleveland again versus Dubai, it's Northeastern Ohio. And you'll see so many creative partnerships that the council has led, that Mayor Jackson has led, that are being held out as an industry best practice nationally. And when I get to travel the country, that's one of the things I love to do, is be the chief cheerleader for Cleveland. Yes.
Yes, I'm Steve Throssell, and my first real job was at SeaWorld of Ohio, and I feel like I cut my teeth there. Even though I no longer live here, I get here quite a bit, and I have a great deal of respect for the Zone family and the community of Cleveland. I think that your emphasis on the mobility, economic mobility, answers a great deal of my question, but I also collect antique firearms, and one of the things that worries me the most about our country and our communities is the proliferation of firearms and the active shooters, especially on campuses and in schools. And I'm wondering what it is the city of Cleveland is doing outside of economic mobility, which is a huge factor to address this issue, and also whether or not there's an idea out there that perhaps service animals like dogs or something that have proven in the past to be willing to give their lives for us could be of use in a school system. And I'll turn the question over to you.
Thank you, and we welcome you back to Cleveland if you want to come back here and live. You know, we're a welcoming city. You know, we have done a lot locally as a city, and our organization has strong policy positions. If you want to ever read our policy manual, it's a pretty voluminous thing, but you can, again, go to NLC and look at our policy. The way our organization is set up, we have a board of directors, 65 members, we have the officers, board of directors, and then there are 7 committees. And we have a public safety and crime prevention committee that has a lot of info on what we've done around stuff that we're advocating on the federal level to control gun laws. I'm a believer in the Second Amendment, but again, we live in the city of Cleveland, and urban centers are very different than, say, a city down in Wayne County, Ohio, if anyone knows where Wayne County is. There are municipalities across our country that have enacted local laws that don't conflict with state law or federal law because it works for their communities. And we did that here locally, here in Cleveland. We did that with assault weapons in the early 2000s. And in 2014, Mayor Jackson, Council President Kelly, and myself led an initiative around enacting an ordinance that made sense for us, that had a registry component. Again, the Supreme Court struck down certain provisions of it. You heard as a considerable portion of my speech, I talked a lot of the state preemption issues. We are a home rule charter authority city, and we have the right to enact these laws and do it in a way that makes sense for Cleveland. Just like the city of Charlotte enacted a law that made sense for them, and then we had the state legislature come in and change that as well. That's the last person.
Is that it?
One more.
Thank you, Councilman Zone. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking all of our questions this afternoon. My name's Kate Kennedy. I'm here with MoveOn.org. We're the largest independent progressive organizing initiative in the country. And one thing that wasn't discussed today and that I just wanted to put on the table and hear from you is how you plan to address really important issues around criminal justice reform. I think you and I can both agree that we incarcerate far too many young people, people of color. And I just wanted to hear from you what cities can do to better address this problem.
Yeah, we have a whole curriculum. It's called the REAL Initiative. It stands for Race, Equity, and Leadership. That we're educating and teaching municipal leaders around these equity issues. There are so many inequalities that exist in our country, and there have been a lot of policies and practices that have been in place for centuries that have really hindered and hurt and criminalized primarily African Americans. And they have to endure so much more burden than we do. Look, I'm a privileged white man standing before you, talking about these issues. If we had more people who look like me and you talking about these types of issues, we would be in a far better place as a country. I'm almost getting the hook from Dan, but this is something that's really important to me. I was thrilled to be one of the founders of the Real Initiative. We're traveling around the country talking about people and educating municipal leaders on this topic. But you too have to sing from the choir. You have to be part of the messenger, help educate. My call to challenge each and every one of you, get to know your council members, your mayors, help educate them on issues that matter to you, where you value. That will make us a better society and a better country. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity.
You want to bust a move?
No.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, a special forum here at the Global Center for Health Innovation. We've been enjoying a Friday forum with Matt Zone, President of the National League of Cities and Councilman for the 15th Ward. Today's address is sponsored by Key Bank with additional support from Thompson Hine. This forum is also part of our Local Heroes series, sponsored by Dominion Energy. Our venue partner today is the Global Center for Health Innovation. We're grateful to all of you for your partnership and your support. Councilman Zone appears today as part of the annual Craig Spangenberg Memorial Forum, made possible by an endowment gift from Spangenberg, Shibley & Lieber, LLP. Two members of that firm are with us today. We thank you very much for being with us today and for your firm's contributions. And that brings us to the end of our program today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a part of this wonderful forum. Have a wonderful weekend. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.